It's a really huge story that broke today involving American First Legal. It's really quite explosive. American First Legal has acquired documents through the legal process, of course, that this entire classified documents case was a sham prosecution from day one. And we have with us Michael Ding, an attorney at American First Legal who worked on this. Michael, how are you, and what exactly did you find?
Thanks for having me, Mark. So we've been investigating the National Archives and their involvement with the classified document prosecution against Trump ever since the FBI had their unprecedented raid on Mar-a-Lago. And so the official story from the Biden administration was that the Trump team sent over some boxes to the archives around January 2022. They conducted a review. They found classified documents. Oh, gosh. And then they referred it to the DOJ and FBI for investigation. And so, again, that's 2022. But what these new emails that were released by the archives show is that by summer of 2021, the archivist was already out of patience and was finding a way to get the Attorney General and the Department of Justice and send them after President Trump. So they were out to get him far earlier than that. And they worked with the Department of Justice and Biden's White House counsel to make it happen.
Well, let's really dig into this a little bit. So you have these emails. I guess this is through FOIA. You probably had to litigate for them, correct?
So we did not have to litigate for this, thankfully. However, this was not released when they first processed the request back in the day. They had only just re-reviewed some of the records and due to some filings that were made in court recently. And so I guess they were forced to conduct a review and reevaluate their withholdings and ended up releasing these records just last week.
So they weren't released, obviously, in time for the people to know before the election. So I would argue that they were slow-walked in one fashion or another.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this, Michael Ding with American First Legal. You have these emails, you have these documents. And so I assume they provide evidence of communications between the National Archives and the Justice Department, as well as communications with potentially the White House?
Yes, that's exactly what these show, and it fills out the picture. I mean, just like us, I'm sure you and others have long understood that this was a sham prosecution from the start. But these emails really fill out the timeline a little bit more. So from 2021, they were trying to find a way to send the Department of Justice after Trump, even though President Trump's team was cooperating in good faith with the archivists and trying to get the records that they needed to get back and process them and send them back.
Well, let's stop right there. So this completely undermines the narrative that Trump was dragging his feet and dragging his feet and dragging his feet, because according to you, the timeline actually moves up, that Trump and his people were trying to work with the archives, but the archives was actually working to try and criminalize this process with the Department of Justice. Is that the point?
That's exactly right. They're certainly trying to raise the temperature and make this much more serious for President Trump than it needed to be at all. So they had two plans that they ended up doing. First plan was to try to shoehorn some provision in the Federal Records Act that says the National Archives can go after the Attorney General to recover records that were lost or about to be destroyed or whatnot. And they recognized that under the Presidential Records Act, there is no such provision, but they were still trying to shoehorn this provision from the Federal Records Act, and that was circa August, September 2021. But they had to scrap that plan because they realized that it doesn't work. They can't send the DOJ after President Trump because the National Archives, they were still having ongoing discussions with President Trump's team. And they thought that there was a very good chance in their emails that said this could help clarify, if not actually resolve the issue. So in their own mind, the National Archives had a sense that if they just kept working with Trump's people, this issue would be resolved and there would be no need for the Department of Justice to get involved.
So they had to figure out a way to get the Department of Justice involved, even though, as President Trump has said from day one, we were working with these people trying to accommodate them, correct?
That's correct. And so they had to come up with another plan. And that's where Biden's Office of White House Counsel got involved, which certainly makes this far more scandalous.
And what happened?
So as we've highlighted for long before, that there's a provision in the Presidential Records Act involving a special access request where there's only certain ways that different people can get access to a former president's records. One is, Congress has a process where they can get these records. Two, a federal agency can go to a court and get a judge to issue a subpoena for those records. And then three, the incumbent president, they can seek the records for the current business of the incumbent president. So we've pointed this out, and we filed an amicus brief, America First Legal. We filed an amicus brief at the trial court in Florida in this case, and we really spelled that out, that if the Department of Justice needed to get access to President Trump's former records, they needed a court-ordered subpoena. But instead, they relied on the White House to use their provision under the Presidential Records Act to get a special access request to President Trump's records. And here we have an email showing that Deputy White House Counsel Jonathan Su came up with some concocted reason where they said, oh, well, we need to get access to this person's notes from the last administration.
Folks, I want to go through this to sum up, and then we'll expand on it slightly with Michael Ding, attorney at American First Legal. What they've uncovered here is really earth-shattering, and my advice to you folks, even though you don't need it, Michael, is to get this information to the Attorney General of the United States to see if there's any action she should take. So just to go over this, they have an email dated September 15, 2021, from Gary M. I'm going to read it, Stern, who's the General Counsel of the National Archives. And I'll explain in a moment. So this means we are holding off on a DOJ letter. What about Congress? Well, let me actually go to the letter above this, if I may. This is dated, the email above it, this is dated the 15th, that's right. Correct. We cannot go to the Department of Justice. They're already talking about trying to criminalize this, folks. You understand? We cannot go to the Department of Justice while we are engaged in ongoing discussions with the White House and the Trump rep, which could help to clarify, if not actually resolve the matter. So they're hot to trot to get this to the Department of Justice, effectively the criminal division, even while they're in the middle of discussions with Trump's people in which they say this might resolve itself, and the White House is involved in it as well, the White House counsel's office. We can address these social media issues and blah, blah, blah later. And so there's a second email. So that means we are holding off on a Department of Justice letter. What about Congress regarding social media issues? So they're looking around for ways to criminalize this or to create a really big issue here, even though they're in good faith discussions, that is, at least the Trump people are, with the National Archives. And this has been the position of the Trump people from day one. The call took place last week, which served to get Deputy White House Counsel Jonathan Su, who you were talking about, Michael, up to speed on the issue and the dispute over whether there are 12 or 24 boxes. This week, Jonathan told me that they are open to having redacted, participate in a meeting with redacted, and possibly redacted. The former staff secretary who was redacted, principal source. Accordingly, they need access to redacted notes from the last administration, which we now hold. So they will be making it special access request. Now, unfortunately, I have to use a magnifying glass because I can't read it all, but I'm In 2023, AFL exposed that a special access request from the Biden White House led to the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago. In both the National Archives' response to AFL and Special Counsel Jack Smith's superseding indictments against President Trump, the Biden administration's official position was that the archives referred the matter to the DOJ for investigation in February 2022 after it received the classified documents from Mar-a-Lago. So, number one, the archives did not act on its own. Number two, the White House counsel, meaning Biden, was intimately involved and had to know about what was taking place step by step. And number three, this was all going on in the late summer and early fall of 2021. 2021, which was, Michael, relatively soon after the president left office. It's not as if he'd been sitting on this stuff for a year, piddling around. They were in open discussions about this. Do I have this about right?
Yeah, you make a good point, Mark. This was summer 2021 when President Trump had just packed up and left from the White House. And you have to compare that to former President Barack Obama, where for a very long time his records were held in some warehouse in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Or even more recently, Vice President Joe Biden's records. We didn't find out about those hanging out in his different beach houses until more than 4 years later. I mean, it was the Obama-Biden administration, then the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration, and then we find out about his records that weren't properly stored. So in terms of timeline, they certainly did not extend the same grace to President Trump.
Mm-hmm. And then you have these other extraordinary, outrageous acts like the SWAT team, criminal warrant, which I question the warrant, but that's a whole other issue. SWAT team sent to Mar-a-Lago. It looks like whenever they could go over the top and increase the aggressive criminalization of the case, they did. Is that your sense of this thing, too?
They were certainly finding any way they could to turn up the heat on President Trump and weaponize the law enforcement functions and powers against him. That much is clear.
So what is America First Legal going to do with this information? Will it be putting it in a package with a nice letter and a bow around it to the Attorney General of the United States, at least informing her directly of your findings?
Well, we certainly hope that the Attorney General, who is doing so much in just the first week there, takes a look at this information, looks at whether there's been any conspiracy against rights or any other possible violations of federal law that was taken by these former government officials. I know that President Trump has recently fired some of the folks at the National Archives, but we really need to get to the bottom of this and find out all the people that were involved.
100%. All right. Well done over there. And, Michael, I understand you were the lead lawyer, certainly one of them, on this matter, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of intense back and forth to get it, and you pulled it off. So congratulations to you. As an old president of Landmark Legal Foundation, I know how much goes into this. So congratulations to you and the team.
Thank you so much, Mark.
All right. Take care of yourself. That's America First Legal. It's an outstanding organization.